is properly enforceable. It has the right measures in place. We've been looking at international experience to make sure we do this correctly, but I am very keen to get on with it, and I can assure the Honourable Lady that we are very much on it.
Shadow Minister Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that it's been almost 3 years since the Government committed to ending the practice of conversion therapy. Will she therefore take the opportunity to apologise to all those who have been harmed by these abhorrent practices as a result of the Government's inaction and commit today to bring forward a full legislative ban on practices to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation or gender identity to give all LGBT people the protection that they deserve?
Secretary Truss.
Well, I'm very clear that these practices are utterly abhorrent. I would point out I've been in this job for a year, and I've been working to make sure that the ban we put in place is enforceable. I've also dealt with a number of other long-standing issues, such as responding to the consultation on the Gender Reform Act and making the process simpler and kinder for transgender people, improving transgender healthcare, and changing the blood donation criteria for gay men donating blood. We're also working on an international LGBT conference titled Safe to Be Me to end discrimination across the world. But it's always important with legislation to make sure we get it right and it's properly enforceable. And we will be bringing plans forward shortly.
Right. We now have a substantive question to Minister Ford. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the pandemic has been hard on all families, especially those who've been juggling work and childcare. And this is one of the reasons why schools remained open to the children of key workers throughout this time, and why early years settings have remained open to all since last June. I meet regularly with colleagues across government to discuss support for families.
Let's go to Patricia Gibson. Patricia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Universal Credit's young parent penalty denies single parents under 25 years old the same level of social security than those above this age, pushing those affected, 90% of whom are women and the majority of them in work, into poverty. What representations is the Minister making to her colleagues in the DWP to fix this arbitrary inequality and discriminatory practice in the social security system and abolish the young parent penalty?
Mr. Speaker, this UK government has put unprecedented amounts of support, billions of support, into helping jobs and income, including the 150 million of the Flexible Support Fund, which is particularly there to help women with access to childcare. And the billions that the UK has been put into supporting jobs, especially of those on low incomes, is yet another reminder of why the people of Scotland increasingly agree that they are better off as part of the UK.
We now come to Topicals, and I now call Secretary Truss.
Mr. Speaker, we have a huge opportunity as we recover from COVID-19 for women across the world to build back better. That's why I'm convening a group of leaders in the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council this year under newly appointed Chair Sarah Sands. Leaders like Professor Sarah Gilbert, who spearheaded the Oxford vaccine, Rita Caradel, who helped lead India's Mars orbital mission, and Iris Bonet, who has revolutionised our understanding of fairness in the workplace. Together, we can lead on education for women and girls, women's economic empowerment, and ending violence against women across the world.
Let's go to Peter Gibson. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. May I commend her on her choice of Darlington for one of the newly announced DIT hubs. I look forward to welcoming her to the Tees Valley. Also welcoming her commitment to a ban on conversion therapy. Does she agree with me that so-called therapy is abuse, and those who perpetrate such abuse should be prevented in law from being able to do so? As a gay man and a Christian, I believe that such controls must also extend to religious organisations that seek to change a person's sexuality. And will she ensure that a ban extends to these too?
Well, I was delighted to announce yesterday that we will be bringing a trade and investment hub to Darlington. We're also looking at moving the headquarters of our Equality Office to the north of England as well, and no doubt Darlington will be putting a bid in for that too. My right honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to stamp out coercion and causing people harm wherever it takes place. And that is what I am determined to do, and that's what I'll be bringing forward shortly.
We now have the first of two questions from Shadow Secretary Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 10 days, we have seen the government try to defend their poor record on ending violence against women. And they have recently reopened the consultation on this issue. But there is no use in consulting people if you aren't going to take any action. Take the consultation on sexual harassment in the workplace. This closed 18 months ago, but we have seen no response from the Minister and no action from the government, despite the fact that half of women experience sexual harassment at work. So can the Minister tell the House today when she will respond to this consultation and take the much needed action to end sexual harassment?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. It's quite wrong to say that the government is taking no action on tackling violence against women. We'll be publishing a new strategy in spring 2021 which will help to better target perpetrators and support victims of these crimes. The call for evidence to input into this work has been extended to 26th of March, and it's vital that we hear from women everywhere, especially given recent public discussions and concerns. There is so much that we have been doing, including the end-to-end rape review, which is looking at how every stage of the criminal justice system handles rape cases from police report to the final outcome at court. So I would say to the Honourable Lady that if she does want to work with us to end violence against women, the way to do it is constructively and not making accusations that we're not taking any action. I should have called over.
We on this side are very committed to ending violence against women and girls. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a pattern with this government. They consult, they review, but then they take very little action. Yesterday, we marked a year since the first national lockdown, and the pandemic, as we all know, has had an unequal impact on our Black, Asian and ethnic minority people. Last July, the Prime Minister commissioned a review into race and ethnic disparities. It was due to be published in December last year. Then they delayed it until February this year, and it is now nearly April and still no report. So can the Minister tell us when the Prime Minister will intend to publish his report? And will it also be accompanied by a race equality strategy to tackle the ongoing structural and institutional inequalities?
The Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities will be reporting shortly, but I think it is important to remind the Honourable Lady, it's disappointing that she seems to forget that this is an independent commission. It is not the Prime Minister who is publishing it. It is an independent commission, and what will happen afterwards is that the government will provide its response to the Commission's recommendations, and we shall wait and see what the Commission actually provides. But what I have intended the Commission has is the freedom and the space to provide a set of recommendations that are robust. We're not doing this just on dates, but actually on data. And we need to make sure that it is something that's going to stand the test of time and not just in response to opposition members who are not actually interested in solving this problem, but want to use it politically.
Right, let's go to Imran Hamad Khan. Imran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the lesser talked about, but more impactful and successful government-run programmes in recent times is the Period Product Scheme for schools and colleges in England, which provides access to free sanitary products for those in education, including approximately 5,000 girls between the ages of 10 and 19 in my Wakefield constituency. Many women across the UK, however, continue to struggle with access to sanitary products, including those experiencing homelessness and those in financial hardship as a consequence of the pandemic. Would my honourable friend kindly outline for the House what steps she is taking to promote access to female sanitary products?
Mr. Speaker, the government has taken several important steps to ensure women are able to access the sanitary products they need. From 1st of January 2021, the tampon tax has been abolished, with a zero rate of VAT applying to women's sanitary products coming into effect. The Department for Education is leading a scheme to provide access to free period products in schools and colleges in England. NHS England also announced in March 2019 that it will offer free period products to every hospital patient who needs them, including long-term patients, And the Home Office has changed the law to ensure all people in custody are provided with health and hygiene products for free, including period products.
Let's go to Chair Morrow. Chair.
Mr. Speaker, in lockdown, we have all become so much more dependent on technology, and yet that technology is not designed to treat us equally. Video conferencing and photo sharing apps which don't recognize Black faces, recruitment algorithms which discriminate on ethnicity, and the Home Office's own visa application algorithm withdrawn because of bias. In this week of the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, what is she doing to prevent structural racism being further entrenched by new technologies?
The Honourable Lady raises a very interesting question. This is something that the government is aware of and is looking into. And in fact, I spoke to Dr. Tony Sewell yesterday, who's chairing the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, and I am aware that this is something that they have researched extensively, and I look forward to seeing what their report says on it.
I'm sorry we didn't get as many in as normal. We've got to move over to questions to the Prime Minister. I'm now going to call the Prime Minister, where it will be beneficial to the Prime Minister to answer his engagements. I will then call Stephen Furry to ask his supplementary. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the last 12 months have been the most difficult for a generation, and I know that the thoughts of the whole House are with all those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic. I also want to pay tribute to every person in this country for playing their part, whether working on the front line, staying at home to prevent the spread of the virus, or working on vaccine development and supply. And it's that vaccination programme that has brought hope, allowing us to set out the cautious but irreversible roadmap out of lockdown. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Let's go to Stephen Furry. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many independent countries, from Switzerland to New Zealand, have bilateral veterinary agreements with the European Union and face lower non-tariff barriers than the UK, despite our very high standards. With the Food and Drink Federation reporting a massive drop in UK food exports, over 90% in some areas, and furthermore, SPS checks constituting the main challenge for the Northern Ireland Protocol, surely the Prime Minister should be making it a priority to negotiate a bespoke UK-EU veterinary agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly why we put in the temporary and technical measures that we have to allow free trade to continue across the whole of the UK. And it's very, very important for those who object to the measures that we have taken that the protocol should uphold the principle of east-west trade as well as north-south trade, and that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. In Sussex, by the end of this week, we will have delivered 1 million COVID jabs. Will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the local vaccine heroes, in particular Adam Doyle and his leadership in Helsham, Charlotte Luck in Uckfield and Dr. Susie Padgham in Crowborough? And will the Prime Minister agree with me that the UK's success is built on the confidence that people have in the fantastic vaccine technology, and should and when our constituents get contacted for a vaccination, they should definitely take up the first available appointment?
Well, I can certainly join her, my honourable friend, in paying tribute to Adam Doyle and Charlotte Luck and Dr. Susie Padgham for all their efforts, and she's completely right in what she says about the foundations of the UK's vaccine success. And I had my jab on Friday, Mr. Speaker. I don't know whether you've had yours, or you certainly have, but I know he's had his. I encourage everybody to get it.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start with joining the Prime Minister in his remarks about yesterday's day of reflection for the 126,000 people who lost their lives to COVID. That's a shocking number, and behind every one of those numbers is a grieving family. As soon as restrictions lift, there must be a full public inquiry, because that is the only way we can get to the bottom of the many mistakes that were made during the pandemic and find justice for those who've suffered so much. Mr. Speaker, why did the Prime Minister promise at the last election that he would, and I quote, not be cutting our armed services in any form?
Mr. Speaker, that was because what we were going to do was actually increase spending on our armed services by the biggest amount since the Cold War, £24 billion, modernising our armed forces, keeping with no redundancies, Mr. Speaker, keeping our army at 100,000 if you include the reserves. And I must say, I take it slightly amiss from the right honourable gentleman when he stood on a manifesto to elect a man who wanted to pull this country out of NATO, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he's fighting the last war, but is he trying to pretend? Is he trying to pretend, hidden in that answer, that the army stands at over 100,000, the number the Prime Minister quoted there? Because it's absolutely clear from the Secretary of State for Defence's statement that I think he made here on Monday. He was absolutely clear. His words, "I have therefore taken the decision to reduce the size of the army to 72,500 by 2025. Only this Prime Minister could suggest that a reduction from 82,000 to 72,000 is somehow not a cut. But the Prime Minister didn't answer my question, which was why did he make that promise? He said, before the last election, Prime Minister, all very well looking up, we will not be cutting our armed services in any form. What did he do this week? He cut the British Army by 10,000. He cut the number of tanks. He cut the number of planes for our RAF. And he cut the number of ships for the Royal Navy. I say he. The Prime Minister didn't have the courage actually to come to the House himself to say what he was doing. So let me ask the Prime Minister a simple question. Going back to that promise before the election, did he ever intend to keep his promise to our armed forces?
No. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only did we keep our promise in the manifesto last time, we actually increased spending by 14% more than that manifesto commitment. And again, Mr. Speaker, I think it frankly satirical to be lectured about the size of the army, when the shadow Foreign Secretary herself only recently wrote that the entire British Army should be turned into a kind of peace corps, Mr. Speaker, and when, as I say, the leader of the opposition stood on a manifesto wanted to elect a leader who himself wanted to disband the armed services. This is a massive investment in our defences and in our future, and it's wonderful to hear the new spirit of jingo that seems to have enveloped some of the Labour benches. They don't like it Upham, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Let's try this for Upham, because the Prime Minister might want to avoid the promises he made, but I found an interview he gave during the general election campaign. Under the headline, here's the headline, "No troop cuts. Tories will maintain size of armed forces." It then goes on to quote the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson has promised that he will not make any new cuts to the armed forces. He also promised, might want to listen to this, Prime Minister, he also promised to maintain numbers at their current level, including the Army's 82,000. Now, I know the Prime Minister's got form for making up quotes, but can he tell us, does he think the newspapers have somehow misquoted him, or does he now remember making that promise?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because there will be no redundancies in our armed forces, and I said to him, if you include reserves, we're even keeping the army at 100,000. But on top of that, Mr. Speaker, we're doing what is necessary to modernise our armed forces, taking them into the 21st century, building more frigates, Mr. Speaker, investing in cyber warfare, Mr. Speaker, doing all the difficult things that Labour shirked during their time in office, including, Mr. Speaker, modernising and upgrading our nuclear deterrent, which again, half the shadow front bench would like to remove, leaving Britain defenceless internationally.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I have every respect for our reservists, but the Prime Minister is just playing with the numbers. He knows very well that the numbers have been cut. The trouble is you just can't trust the Conservatives to protect our armed forces. Let's look. Mr. Speaker, let's look at their last manifestos. These are the manifestos that those opposites stood on. The 2015 manifesto.
Order. I'm struggling to hear the Leader of the Opposition, and I will hear the Leader of the Opposition, so please, I want the same respect to the Prime Minister as respect for the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2015 manifesto. We will maintain the size of the regular armed services. The 2017 manifesto. We will maintain the overall size of the armed forces. 2019, the Prime Minister. We will not be cutting our armed services in any form. But the truth is, since 2010, our armed forces have been cut by 45,000. And our army will now be cut to its lowest level in 300 years. Let me remind the Prime Minister and members opposite why this matters. Lord Richards, former Chief of Defence Staff, has warned that with an armed force of this size now, we almost certainly wouldn't be able to retake the Falklands or stop genocide. He says it's rubbish. That's Lord Richards, Prime Minister. After 10 years of Conservative government, is the Prime Minister not ashamed of that?
Mr. Speaker, this Conservative government is massively proud of the investment that we've made in our armed forces, which, as I say, is the biggest uplift since the Cold War. And he should look at what the NATO Secretary-General had to say about our investment, which is absolutely vital for the future success of the alliance and, indeed, for the security of many other countries around the world. A £24 billion investment in the future combat air system, a new Army Special Operations Ranger Regiment, £1.3 billion to upgrade the Challenger main battle tanks, massive investment in the Typhoon squadrons, and so on. We're investing in the future, Mr. Speaker, and yes, of course, we've had to take some tough decisions, but that's because we believe in our defences and we believe that they should be more than merely symbolic. And it's the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, who are consistently, historically, hilarious to be lectured about the Falklands, Mr. Speaker, consistently weak on protecting this country, and you heard it. It was most visible last week, Mr. Speaker, during the debate on the integrated review, when it was plain that the shadow front bench couldn't even agree to maintain Britain's nuclear deterrent. Absolutely true, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, what's weaker than making a promise to our armed forces just before the election, then breaking it and not being prepared to admit it, not having the courage to admit it? And there's a pattern here, Mr. Speaker. He promised the NHS that they would have, quote, whatever they need. Now nurses are getting a pay cut. He promised a tax guarantee. Now he's putting taxes up for families. He promised he wouldn't cut the armed forces. Now he's done just that. So if the Prime Minister is so proud of what he's doing, so determined to push ahead, why doesn't he at least have the courage to put this cut in the armed forces to a vote in this House?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of what we're doing to increase spending on the armed forces by the biggest amount since the Cold War. The only reason we can do that, Mr. Speaker, is because under this Conservative government we've been running a sound economy, and it's also because we believe in defence. We've been getting on with the job. He talks about nurses and investment in the NHS. I'm proud of the massive investment that we've made in the NHS, and actually we have 60,000 more nurses now in training, and we've increased their starting salary by 12.8%. We're getting on with the job, Mr. Speaker, of recruiting more police, 20,000 more police. I think we've done 7,000 already. While they're out on the streets, Mr. Speaker, at demonstrations shouting, "Kill the bill," Mr. Speaker. That's the difference. That's the difference between his party and my party. We're pro-vax, Mr. Speaker. We're low tax, and when it comes to defence, we've got your backs, Mr. Speaker.
Can I just say, I genuinely mean this. I do not believe any member of Parliament would support that kill the bill. I've got to be very careful of what we say. I say we are all united in this House in the support and the protection that the police do offer us, and nobody will shy away from that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question, Prime Minister, is why not put it, and I didn't have the courage to put it to a vote. That question, of course, was avoided, Mr. Speaker, like all of the questions. And we all know why he won't put it to a vote. Let me quote his Conservative MP, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, because he recognises, and he has experience and respect across the House, he recognises that this review means dramatic cuts to our troop numbers, tanks, armoured fighting vehicles, and more than 100 RAF aircraft. And he goes on to say, your MP, Prime Minister, cuts that, if tested by a parliamentary vote, I do not believe would pass. Not me, his own MPs. Mr. Speaker, can I say this? Because I want to turn to another issue that affects thousands of jobs in many communities across the country. 5,000 jobs are at risk at Liberty Steel, with many more in the supply chain. The UK steel industry is under huge pressure, and the government's failure to prioritise British steel in infrastructure projects is costing millions of pounds in investment. So will the Prime Minister now commit to working with us and the trade unions to change this absurd situation, to put British steel first, and do whatever is necessary to protect those jobs?
Mr. Speaker, I'll just remind, I'm of course happy to cooperate in any way, but the steel output halved under the Labour government. I share very much the anxiety of families of steel workers who work in Liberty Steel, and that's why my honourable friend, the Business Secretary, has had, I think, 3 meetings just in the last few days with Liberty Steel to take the question forward, see what we can do. We are actively engaged. We're investing huge sums in modernising British Steel plants, making them more environmentally friendly. But we have a massive opportunity, Mr. Speaker, because this government is engaged on a £640 billion infrastructure campaign. HS2, the great Dogger Bank wind farms, Hinkley, all the things that we're now building, the Beeching Railway reversals, all the things that we're doing across the country, they will call for millions and millions of tonnes of British steel. And now, Mr. Speaker, thanks to leaving the European Union, we have an opportunity to direct that procurement at British firms in the way that we would want to do. Whereas I know that the right honourable gentleman would like nothing more than to take this country back into the European Union and remove that opportunity for British steel and British steel workers.
Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I spoke with young people in Aberconwy about their experiences of 12 months living with lockdowns. They were very articulate about the challenges they've overcome and about their concerns for their future, finding a job, moving to a new university. Does the Prime Minister have a message for Evie, Jonas, Saul and Lauren, who I spoke with, and other young people who are thinking about their future and a life after lockdown?
Yes, my message is just to thank them and to say for what they put up with, and to say I'm sorry about how difficult it has been for their generation. I don't think there can be any group of young people who have been put through much or have had to sacrifice so much in our lifetimes, and we owe it to them to repair their education and to get them into work as fast as we possibly can, and that's why we've set out the £2 billion Kickstart Fund and many other schemes which I hope will be useful to his constituents.
Let's go to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, my brilliant colleague, the member for Adrian Shotts, made his final speech to this Parliament. He is standing for the Scottish Parliament and is doing the right thing by stepping down as an MP. By doing the right thing, he will avoid a dual mandate and a separate by-election that would cost the public £175,000. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Tory leader is also seeking a place in the Scottish Parliament, but is refusing to step down as an MP. So, as his boss, will the Prime Minister order the member for Moray to resign his seat, avoid a dual mandate, and save the taxpayer £175,000? Or are dual mandates one more Tory policy where they think greed is good?
Prime Minister.
I think my honourable friend, the member for Murray and Ross, is doing an excellent job of holding the Scottish National party to account for their manifold failings, not least on education, failing to deliver on crime, and failing, in my view, to deliver for the people of Scotland, so caught up as they are in their desire for independence and another referendum. And I'm for separation. I'm amazed, actually, that he hasn't mentioned it so far, but perhaps he will now.
Let's go back to Ian Blackford. Ian.
Simply yet again a Prime Minister failing to answer a question, and that charge that greed is good in the Tory policies. Mr. Speaker, we know that Tory leaders in Scotland have a habit of dodging democracy. Baroness Davison is fleeing the House of Lords, and the current Tory leader is too fierce to stand in a constituency. No wonder this morning's Daily Record declared that the Scottish Tories have exposed themselves as shameless, as nasty, and just plain daft. They are led by a man so devoid of imagination that when asked what he would do if he was Prime Minister for a day, he replied, "I would like to see tougher enforcement against gypsy travellers." Does the Prime Minister really have confidence in a Scottish Tory leader who doesn't even have the courage to put himself before the voters in a Scottish constituency?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, and the right honourable gentleman represents a party that's so devoid of imagination that it can't come up with any workable solutions to help the people of Scotland improve their education, improve the fight against crime, cut taxes in Scotland where they're the highest in the whole of the UK. They're so devoid of imagination, Mr. Speaker. They're the one track record. All they can talk about is a referendum to break up the United Kingdom. That's their song. I'm amazed, actually. It's twice he hasn't mentioned it. Maybe he's getting nervous of singing that particular song. Have you know? It's rather curious, Mr. Speaker. Well, he's not coming back, is he? But next week, let's see, or after Easter, let's see if he mentions it again.
Maroon Cakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend has already said, the steel industry is fundamental to our future in the UK, and we can't reach our net zero commitments or our infrastructure targets without steel. But Stocksbridge Speciality Steels in my constituency does have an uncertain future because of the funding challenges faced by Liberty Group. The Stocksbridge Works is a strategic asset of national importance. So what assurances can my right honourable friend give my constituents that the government will do what it takes to safeguard jobs and livelihoods and secure the future of steelmaking in the UK?
I thank my honourable friend, and she's a passionate and successful advocate for her constituents and for steelmaking in this country, in which this government passionately believes. And that's why, as I was saying to the right honourable gentleman, we're supporting the UK steel industry with more than 500 million of relief, but also with huge investments to make our steelmaking more greener and more competitive. And we will do everything we can, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we continue with British jobs for producing British steel with the infrastructure investments that I've mentioned and directing that procurement at British jobs in the way that we now can.
David.
The Prime Minister talks about restoring freedoms as we emerge from the lockdown. It is pushing a bill that will restrict one of our most fundamental freedoms, the right to peaceful protest and peaceful assembly. And tomorrow, he is asking for another blank cheque to restrict everyone's freedoms until September, even though we now know the vast bulk of the Coronavirus Act is not needed to tackle the pandemic. So will the Prime Minister, for once, match his actions to his words, drop these draconian laws and instead publish a roadmap to revive civil liberties and freedoms in our country?
I sympathise very much with his desire to see freedoms restored. And I want to do that as fast as we possibly can. That's why we've set out the cautious but we hope irreversible roadmap that we have, which I hope that he supports. I hope the right honourable gentleman also supports, so you can never tell, Mr. Speaker. But what we also want to do is to make sure that we're able to deal with the very considerable backlog that we faced because of the pandemic. So making sure that we have powers still to accelerate court procedures with Zoom courts, to make sure that we allow volunteers to continue to help in the NHS, retired staff to come back to the colours, powers that are necessary in education. It is important to be able to continue with those special measures for the months ahead, and that's why we've set out the bill as we have.
Lucia.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Tracy Felstead is at the Court of Appeal today, along with 41 other sub-postmasters. She is seeking to clear her name in a grotesque miscarriage of justice, the Post Office Horizon scandal. The court has heard that the institutional imperative to back a flawed IT system and to convict sub-postmasters, destroying lives of decent men and women in a ruthless determination to protect the Post Office, come what may. Taxpayers will be picking up the bill for this multi-million-pound reckless wrongdoing. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that in order for justice to be truly done, that those responsible for this failure and its cover-up, they must be held to account? Does he agree that heads should roll?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've certainly, I certainly understand my honourable friend's strong feelings on this issue, and her campaign is one I think that is shared by many members across this House, and that's why we launched the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry, which has made actually quite fast progress. And yes, we do want to learn the lessons. Yes, we do want to make sure that the right people are held to account for what happened, and that the Post Office never repeats a mistake like this.
Let's go to Alan Dorrans. Alan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Subject to certain conditions being met, the Northern Ireland Act of 1998 allows for the Secretary of State of Northern Ireland to call a referendum on Irish reunification, and for Northern Ireland to leave the United Kingdom within 7 years of a previous referendum. These conditions for a referendum have all been more than met in Scotland since the independence referendum in 2014, 7 years ago. We are allegedly a union of equal nations. So why, as a Democrat, will the Prime Minister not agree to a Section 30 order enabling the democratic will of the people of Scotland to be measured? Is it because he's fearful of the likely outcome?
Mr. Speaker, I knew it wouldn't be long. There they are. The reason, Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, as senior members of his party said, it was a once-in-a-generation event in 2014. I think the point of view that is shared across the House, and quite rightly. But the other reason, which is absolutely plain to most people in this country, is that we're all trying to build back better, get out of a pandemic, and I think that is the priority for the British people. I think it's the priority for the whole country, and I think people are frankly amazed to hear the Scottish Nationalist Party still, in these circumstances, banging on about their constitutional obsessions.
Let's go to John Long.
Mr. Speaker, Scottish rugby legend Doddy Weir lives in my constituency and has been diagnosed with motor neuron disease. Doddy's foundation, the My Name's Doddy Foundation, is campaigning alongside the research community, patients, MND Scotland and the MND Association for the government to invest £50 million over 5 years to establish a virtual MND research institute. Now, I understand positive discussions have already taken place with the Health Secretary, but it's important to ensure other priorities such as this are not lost in the pandemic. Will the Prime Minister commit the government to supporting this initiative so we can work towards finding a cure to this devastating disease?
I thank my honourable friend very much for raising this important question and for championing research into motor neuron disease, and I thank him also for raising the excellent work of the My Name's Doddy Foundation. And we've spent £54 million in the last 5 years towards this cause, Mr. Speaker, and we're looking now at ways significantly to boost the research that we're supporting.
Let's go to Afzal Khan. Afzal.
Mr. Speaker, a year into this crisis and more than 126,000 lives have been lost. Behind this staggering figure are millions grieving their loved ones. In my family, we have lost an entire generation. I couldn't hold my mom's hand as she lay dying, and I recently lost both my father and mother-in-law within just days of one another. Grieving families like mine want and deserve to understand what happened, and if anything could have been done to prevent this tragedy. So will the Prime Minister today commit to launching a full public inquiry into the handling of the pandemic as soon as current restrictions are lifted?
Mr. Speaker, I want to say to the honourable gentleman that I know that the whole House shares my sympathies and my sorrow for your loss, for his loss. And we sympathise also with his entire family, Mr. Speaker. And I know that his experience is one, as he rightly says, that has been shared by far too many families up and down the country. And that is why we are, of course, committed, as soon as it's right to do so, as soon as it wouldn't be an irresponsible diversion of the energies of the key officials involved. We are, of course, committed to an inquiry, to learn the lessons, to make sure that something like this can never happen again.
Can I just try and push us through to get through the list? Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 3rd of May, Wembley is scheduled to host the finals of the FA Vase and FA Trophy. Not from this season, but delayed a year from the last one. But that date means that no fans can go, even though a trip to Wembley to follow their team is like a holy grail, especially for the smaller clubs. The MPs for the clubs involved, that's the members for North West Durham, Jarrow, Castle Point and myself, have raised this with the FA. Will the Prime Minister join us in encouraging those scheduling the matches to do all they can to move the date so that fans can attend?
Yeah. I hope very much, Mr. Speaker, that the Football Association will have listened carefully to what my honourable friend has to say, and they do what they can. And I look forward to May the 17th, when spectators, according to the roadmap, may return.
Ronnie Collins.
Much, Mr. Speaker. 17 months ago, Prime Minister, I stood in this place and asked you what you're going to do to get medical cannabis to children suffering from rare forms of epilepsy. And you said to me you recognise their desperate difficulties and that you would take it up personally with me. Their difficulties are still desperate, and you've not taken this up personally with me. In the interim, we've developed new medicines, distributed them around the country, given to people who need them free of charge. Why are we discriminating against these children? What are they? Are they worth less than the general public? And will the Prime Minister move to make medical cannabis available to children with epilepsy? And if you could please, Prime Minister, take this up with me personally, 5 minutes of your time today could go a long, long way.
Well, I'm very happy to do whatever we can to meet with the honourable gentleman and take the matter forward. But the Dutch government, I'm told, has confirmed they will allow the continued supply of Bedrocan oil against UK prescriptions until at least the summer until July, as he rightly says. And my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is working to find a permanent solution. I have no doubt that he'll be very happy to meet with the honourable gentleman.
Let's go to Derek Thomas. Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the past 12 months, I, like many others, would not want the job of Prime Minister, even for all the tea in China. However, the job does give opportunities to directly improve the lives of people who are very, very sick. March is Brain Tumour Awareness Month, and over 100,000 people have signed a brain tumour research petition calling for the government to match brain tumour research funding with other devastating cancers. And we know through COVID that properly funded research really can bring improved care, treatment and a cure. Will my friend, the Prime Minister, meet with me to receive the petition when it is safe to do so?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank him for what he's doing. I congratulate him for what he's doing to champion research into brain cancer, and I know from activists in my own constituency where the Centre of Hope runs the Hillingdon Brain Tumour Injury Group, how vital it is, because too often people don't appreciate the number of people who are the victims of brain tumours, and we've put another 40 million into brain tumour research, and we are certainly going to put more, and I look forward to meeting my honourable friend.
Let's go to Emma Lewell-Burke. Emma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, Ronald and Julia Sheriff's daughter, Danielle, currently lives in Gran Canaria. Last year, aged just 33, she suffered an aneurysm. Danielle remains deeply unwell and her family are crowdfunding to bring her back home to live. They have been advised that when she does return home, she won't be eligible for the treatment that she needs on the NHS. Please, can the Prime Minister support the crowdfund for Danny and give his personal assurance that she will receive the care that she needs from our NHS?
I thank her very much for raising the case, and my deepest sympathies with Danielle and her family, and will make sure that the relevant health minister meets her to discuss the case as fast as possible.
Right, let's just go to Kelly Tolhurst. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 40 years on from my predecessor, Dame Peggy Fenner's opposition to the closure of Chatham Dockyard with the loss of thousands of jobs, I am now opposing the closure of what today is Chatham Docks, with the loss of over 1,000 skilled jobs. This regionally important asset, home to successful maritime and construction businesses, all growing in spite of COVID to make way for flats, short-term profit for the landowner at the expense of long-term economic and environmental benefit. Does my right honourable friend agree with me, local councillors and the Save Chatham Docks campaign, that coastal infrastructure plays a significant role in the growth of our local economies, creating jobs in clean maritime technology, contributing to our net zero ambition?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why we put £24 billion into defence alone is that it drives 400,000 jobs around the country, including the building of new frigates and new ships of all kinds. And I hope very much that Chatham will benefit from the £100 million funding we put in on the 24th of December to rejuvenate coastal towns. The matter she raises, the planning issue she raises, is a matter for the local council, but I do hope a solution can be found which gives the benefits that she describes for the local community.
Let's go to Paul Blomfield. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night I met again with leaseholders whose lives have been torn apart by the cladding and building safety scandal. Now, the Prime Minister will recall that he told the House on the 3rd of February, and I quote, "No leaseholder should have to pay for the unaffordable costs of fixing safety defects that they did not cause and are no fault of their own. No ifs, no buts, an unequivocal pledge." Now, the government's measures so far fall well short of fulfilling it. So could the Prime Minister say now, not what has been done, but what he will do to deliver his promise?
Mr. Speaker, in addition to the £3.5 billion of investment that we're provided to remediate the cladding and the 1.6 billion that we've already done, we're providing a new scheme for leaseholders in the lower risk buildings of I think the kind that he's describing to pay for unsafe remediation over the long term, and there will also be a new levy and tax on developers so that they also contribute to the remediation costs.
Sir Mike Penning.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Before the Prime Minister became Prime Minister, we had a discussion to do with the prescribed medical use of cannabis and how it was helping to save really seriously ill children, not hundreds of thousands, but about 150. We changed the law in November 2018 to make it legal for these prescriptions to be written, prescriptions written by top consultants. Today, we have 3 children that have it free on the NHS, and around about 150 children that have to beg and borrow their families and remortgage their homes so that they can actually pay around about £2,000 a month. Prime Minister, this is wrong. As a father, like I am, you would do everything possible for your families. And these families are doing everything possible for their children. Can we have a follow-up meeting to the one in 2018 where I will bring one of the mothers who actually gets it free, not to stop her getting it free, but to explain to the Prime Minister how wrong this is, that children's lives are going to be lost if we have to go through the process that the NHS is proposing.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the second time I've asked. I thank my right honourable friend very much, and he's right to raise it, and we will make sure that we have a proper meeting with the Department of Health so that we can resolve the issue of how to make sure that the Bedrocan or the cannabis-based products that are coming from Holland, that supply can be made secure and can continue.
Don Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, can I personally thank you for your support for Parliament's COVID memorial quilt. Prime Minister, after PM Keys, I will be presenting my cross-party private members' bill, the Coronavirus No. 2 bill, to Parliament. It's based on scientific advice, sage guidance and lessons learned. Will the Prime Minister please commit to reading this bill and please provide me with a written response, maybe by tomorrow? I know that's a bit of a long ask, but if not, within the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
I'm very happy to make that commitment, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Philip Davis. Philip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To paraphrase the late, great, much missed Eric Forth, Mr. Speaker, I believe in individual freedoms and individual responsibility. I believe that individuals make better decisions for themselves, their families and their communities than the state makes for them. I loathe the nanny state and I believe in cutting taxes. Prime Minister, am I still a Conservative?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Dave Dugan. Dave.
Mr. Speaker, we learned today, unfortunately from the media rather than a minister, that the Treasury has informed the Veterans Office that their budget is to be cut by 40% from 5 million to 3 million. Now, this cannot be right, Mr. Speaker, as just yesterday, Graham Day, the SNP Scottish Government's Veterans Minister, announced a further £1 million to support Scottish veterans alone. These disparate positions are irreconcilable. This is a tale of two governments. So will the Prime Minister follow the SNP's lead and assure the House today that he will not allow this cut to UK funding for veterans?
Prime Minister.
Not only was this the first government to create a Veterans Minister specifically with the charge of looking after veterans, Mr. Speaker, not only have we invested in them, but we've also taken steps to protect our armed service veterans from vexatious litigation pursued by lefty lawyers, Mr. Speaker, of a kind sitting not a million miles away from me today, who pursue them long after they have served Queen and country, and when no new evidence has been provided. We tried to protect them, Mr. Speaker. We have protected them, and that party voted against it, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Andrew Bridgen. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has always enjoyed his visits to my constituency of North West Leicestershire, whether it's Ashby de la Zouch on the eve of the historic referendum or Castle Rock School, Colville, last August. He will therefore be pleased, but not surprised, that Leicestershire County Council for the last 3 years has been the most productive county authority in the country, despite also being the lowest funded. Can my right honourable friend assure all the residents of Leicestershire that our Conservative-controlled County Council will imminently benefit from fairer funding and the government's levelling up agenda so that it can continue to deliver excellent public services?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I thank Leicestershire County Council for the way they're conducting themselves and for delivering value for money. And that is what the elections that are coming up in May are all going to be about, Mr. Speaker. Invariably, it is Conservatives who deliver better value, who deliver better services and lower taxes. And that is what Leicestershire County Council has done, and I congratulate them on it, and I fully agree with what my honourable friend has said.
Chris Elmer.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. The government has said that the Community Renewal Fund is a fantastic opportunity for Wales, yet Bridgend County is not listed as a priority place for the fund. And on the 10th of February, at the dispatch box, the Prime Minister invented, and I quote, a world-leading battery plant for Bridgend in response to the significant job losses we've faced across my county borough in the last 2 years. something the Prime Minister has still refused to apologise to my constituents for. When will he stop treating my constituents as an afterthought? Keep true to his promise of not a penny less for Wales, and ensure that he brings real investment to my constituents in Ogmore.
Well, I can tell that the honourable gentleman in Ogmore and across Wales, the people of Wales and the Welsh Government will receive an additional £5.2 billion of resource funding on top of the spring budget funding of 2020-21. 800 million of the Levelling Up Fund is going to the devolved nations, and each local authority in Wales will receive £125,000 in capacity funding, and I look forward to working with him and with Welsh local government to deliver those improvements.
That's the final question. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements before we start the next business. Order.
People coming to the UK through resettlement routes will be granted indefinite leave to remain. They will receive more support to learn English, find work and integrate. And I will also act to help those who have suffered injustices by amending the British nationality law so that members of the Windrush generation will be able to obtain British citizenship more easily. Second, this plan marks a step change in our approach as we toughen our stance to deter illegal entry and the criminals that endanger life by enabling it. Many illegal arrivals have travelled through a safe country like France to get to the UK, where they could and should have claimed asylum. We must act to reduce the pull factors of our system and disincentivise illegal entry. For the first time, whether people enter the UK legally or illegally will have an impact on how their asylum claim progresses, and on their status in the UK if that claim is successful. We will deem their claim as inadmissible and make every effort to remove those who enter the UK legally, having travelled through a safe country first, in which they could and should have claimed asylum. Only where removal is not possible will those who have successful claims, having entered illegally, receive a new temporary protection status. This is not an automatic right to settle. They will be regularly reassessed for removal and will include limited access to benefits and limited family reunion rights. Our tough new stance will also include new maximum life sentences for people smugglers and facilitators, new rules to stop unscrupulous people posing as children, and strengthening enforcement powers for Border Force. Third, we will seek to rapidly remove those with no right to be here in the UK, establishing a fast-track appeals process, streamlining the appeals system and making quicker removal decisions for failed asylum seekers and dangerous foreign criminals. We will tackle the practice of meritless claims which clog up the courts with last-minute claims and appeals, a fundamental unfairness that lawyers tell me frustrates them too. Because for too long, our justice system has been gamed. Almost 3/4 of migrants in detention raise last-minute new claims, challenges or other issues, with over 8 in 10 of these eventually being denied as valid reasons to stay in the UK. Enough is enough. Our new plan sets out a one-stop process to require all claims to be made up front. No more endless, meritless claims to frustrate removal. No more stalling justice. Our new system will be faster and fairer and will help us better support the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, our new plan builds on the work already done to take back control of our borders, building a system that upholds our reputation as a country where criminality is not rewarded, but which is a haven for those in need. There are no quick fixes or shortcuts to success, but this long-term plan, pursued doggedly, will fix our broken system. We know, Mr. Speaker, that members of the opposition would prefer a different plan, one that embraces the idea of open borders. Many of them were reluctant to end free movement, with members opposite on record as having said that all immigration controls are racist or sexist. And to those who say we lack compassion, I simply say that while people are dying, we must act to deter these journeys. And if you don't like our plan, where is yours? This government promised to take a common sense approach to controlling immigration, legal and illegal, and we will deliver on that promise. The UK is playing its part to tackle the inhumanity of illegal migration, and today, Mr. Speaker, I will press for global action at the G6. I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. The Home Secretary said in her statement that the asylum system is broken, and she talked about a persistent failure of the rules. They are stark admissions for a Conservative Home Secretary whose party has been in power for 11 years. 11 years. And the truth is, we've seen Conservative failure across the board. The Home Secretary mentioned the Windrush generation, whilst this government presides over a compensation scheme that its own figures show has only helped 338 people. And then there's the asylum processing system that's appallingly slow. The share of applications that received an initial decision within 6 months fell from 87% in 2014 to just 20% in 2019. And it's no point blaming others. This is the fault of Conservative ministers and a failure of leadership at the Home Office. And there hasn't been the progress we need on the promised agreement with France, on dealing with appalling criminal gangs and rises in the horrific crime of human trafficking. And yes, the government policy is defined by a lack of compassion and a lack of competence. And I'm afraid the plans outlined by the government today look like they're going to continue in exactly the same vein. No wonder the plans outlined have been described as inhumane by the British Red Cross. The plans risk baking into the UK system the callousness, frankly, of this government's approach. No wonder either that the UNHCR has expressed its concerns about the government's understanding of international law. The Home Secretary spoke today about the importance of safe and legal routes. Yet the resettlement scheme was suspended and the dub scheme was shamefully closed down after accepting just 480 unaccompanied children rather than the 3,000 that were expected. I mean, the Immigration Minister continues to shout at me. He can't hide from the government's record of the last 11 years. And the government looked the other way last summer. Rather than help children stuck in the burning refugee camp of Lesbos, they turned the other way. And at the same time, these changes risk making the situation even worse for victims of human trafficking, as it would be even harder to access help in the UK, helping criminal gangs escape justice. Ministers have abolished the Department for International Development, the very department that helped address the forces that drive people from their homes in the first place: war, poverty and persecution. And not only are government plans lacking in compassion, they don't even have the competence to explain how their plans would work. A central part of the measures briefed out by the government rely on new international agreements. And yet the Home Secretary couldn't mention one of those agreements that have been concluded this morning. Sources close to the Home Secretary have briefed out ridiculous, inhumane schemes, such as processing people in the Ascension Islands over 4,000 miles away, wave machines in the English Channel to drive back boats. And when the government briefed out plans recently for Gibraltar and the Isle of Man, they were dismissed within hours. The proposals also show, Mr. Speaker, that the government has not woken up to the urgent need to protect the UK against the pandemic and support our health and social care system to rebuild. We've heard the Prime Minister this week be dangerously complacent about a third wave of COVID from Europe, and the threat of new variants continues to grow. Yet none of the UK government plans include measures desperately required to protect the UK. We need world-leading border protections against COVID, including a comprehensive hotel quarantining system. Yet throughout this pandemic, the government has done too little, too late. The proposals do nothing to address the recruitment crisis in the health and social care system, where urgent changes are needed to help recruit the medical and social care staff to deal with COVID and NHS waiting lists. Mr. Speaker, the reality is the measures outlined today will do next to nothing to stop people making dangerous crossings, and they risk withdrawing support from desperate people. The Conservatives have undoubtedly broken the immigration system over the last 11 years, but the reality today is they have absolutely no idea how to fix it.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly, let me take the Right Honourable Gentleman's distasteful comparisons to Windrush head on. Members of the Windrush generation came to the UK lawfully to help rebuild Britain, and they were wronged by successive governments, Mr. Speaker, including Labour governments. It is simply insulting to attempt to draw parallels between them and those entering our country unlawfully. This government is not only ensuring that Windrush victims receive compensation, the compensation that they deserve, but, Mr. Speaker, today I'm announcing new measures to fix historic anomalies in the British nationality law to ensure that members of the Windrush generation can receive British citizenship more easily. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a Conservative Home Secretary and a Conservative Prime Minister and Government righting these wrongs. And as I've set out previously in this House, the Home Office is absolutely committed to supporting victims of the Windrush generation. And that is why today I have launched the biggest and the most wide-ranging consultation when it comes to this new plan for immigration. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman has commented on the record of Conservatives in government. So let me just set out some facts for him. From the expulsion of Ugandan Asians, such as my own family members, from a repressive regime, to proudly resettling more refugees, as the Honourable Gentleman heard me say in my statement, more than any other EU country, to supporting campaigners fleeing political persecution in Hong Kong. That is the record of Conservatives when it comes to humanitarianism. And under the Conservative leadership of this government, the United Kingdom will always provide a sanctuary to people who are having the lights switched off on their own liberty and personal freedoms. And this new plan will build upon that. Now, thirdly, I am quite astonished, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the tone of the honourable gentleman's comments, repeatedly suggesting that we just turn a blind eye to people attempting to come into our country illegally, people that are being smuggled in small boats, in the back of lorries. He will well know that we have stood in this House too often to hear about the tragedy of people that have died, whether it's in the Channel or in the back of refrigerated lorries. And I will not apologise for being abundantly clear that an illegal journey to the UK is not worth the risk. And that is what this plan is about. It is about tackling illegal migration, protecting lives, and of course, alongside that, creating new routes. Finally, the right honourable gentleman accuses me and the government of lacking compassion. He accuses me of taking an inhumane approach. Now, I would just suggest politely to the right honourable gentleman that he should not really resort to personal attacks of that nature. As someone, and my own family in particular, that understands what oppression is like and fleeing persecution and sought refuge in the United Kingdom and has successfully, like millions of others, rebuilt their lives. But I do think that lack of substance is not surprising because there are no plans on the party opposite to fix the broken system. And in fact, I understand last night, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party's response to my plan was very much to look at my plan. So what I do suggest is that as long as they are devoid of a plan of substance, they themselves are defending a broken system that is encouraging illegal migration and supporting criminality, defending a system which is enabling an established criminal trade in asylum seekers, causing human misery, a system which is disregarding the world's most vulnerable, elbowing women and children to the side, a system which is resulting in, as I have seen far too often, the tragic loss of life. The family of 5 drowned on their way to this country, our country, only last year. The 39 victims in Purfleet found dead in the back of a refrigerated lorry only in 2019. That, Mr. Speaker, is inhumane. And if the honourable gentleman and his party is prepared to be associated with that criminal trade in asylum seeking and human misery, then he is the one that lacks compassion. And it's not a position that we will take, and I will not be complicit in defending the indefensible on that basis. Finally, Mr. Speaker, it is quite extraordinary to hear from the honourable gentleman in the party opposite lectures about our border when it is still the official Labour Party policy to maintain and extend free movement rights as per their party conference motion. In effect, Mr. Speaker, to have open borders. We are the only party prepared to tackle this issue of illegal migration, show compassion to those that are being trafficked in the world, and create safe and legal routes so that we can help to save lives.
Let's go to Sean Bailey. Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement because, just like my constituents, I'm angry at the images that we're seeing of small boats coming into the Channel and the skyrocketing costs of our asylum system, resources which could be used to tackle the inequalities in areas such as the Lost City in Tipton and give those kids on that estate the chances to succeed. But the broader issue here, Mr. Speaker, is this: our European neighbours need to step up. It's as simple as that. So can my right honourable friend reassure my constituents in Wednesbury, Oldbury and Tipton, who have put their faith in her, that she will continue to make the point to our European neighbours they have got to step up, because it is not fair on the United Kingdom to take the lion's share of protecting some of the most vulnerable people in our society.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we are a compassionate nation, and we stand by everything that we do when it comes to providing humanity and protection to individuals that are being persecuted. And he's made the point incredibly well on behalf of his constituents that we will continue, as I will today, with the G6 and our international counterparts and across European Union member states, that they also need to do more, because until they do, people will continue to die, and this is a collective responsibility that we all have.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Anne McLaughlin.
There is so much wrong with these proposals that distilling it into 2 minutes is impossible, Mr. Speaker. What person, what government with an ounce of compassion or respect for international law would even consider, as they are doing, casting vulnerable people off to an island using an offshoring system that in Australia's case has been described by the UN as an affront to common decency? Who, with any regard to the rule of law, would limit the right to appeal? The high success rate of asylum appeals clearly shows the Home Office are getting these decisions wrong too often. Are we or are we not still signatories to the UN Refugee Convention? Is the Home Secretary aware of Article 31, which prohibits penalising someone for the way in which they reached a country, or for that matter, for arriving so-called illegally? Does she know that nowhere in there does it say that someone cannot transit through another country to get here? That was never the intention of the convention, and to say it is simply untrue. Does she remember that Nicholas Winton, rightly hailed as a hero for rescuing hundreds of children from Nazi refugee camps, was reported to have forged documents because the Home Office were too slow? Those children would today be classed as illegal and he would be a criminal. But he was a hero because he recognised that desperate people have no choice. And the same is true today for many who reach our shores. The Home Secretary should be ashamed to make this statement today, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing pretty about this. It's ugly dog whistle politics, and I can tell her that the SNP wants no part in it. More importantly, Scotland will not live with the associated shame of this. Scotland recognises its international and moral obligations, but we also recognise that we're prevented by the UK government from living up to them. I despair for those having to live under this toxic environment. I will always offer my solidarity, but I'll also work even harder to ensure Scotland votes yes to independence so that we at least can continue to treat vulnerable people with compassion and dignity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, firstly, Mr. Speaker, I will refer the Honourable Lady to my statement, and if she reads it and had even bothered to listen to it, she would have heard a compelling case for stopping people trafficking, stopping illegal migration, and creating safe and legal routes, something I would have thought she would warmly welcome. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, in response to the Honourable Lady, it seems to me that the Nationalist Party in Scotland need to do much more themselves to walk the talk when it comes to resettling refugees and working with the government when it comes to housing individuals that are fleeing persecution. And sadly, that work is not taking place. I can see her involved in some gestures towards me, Mr. Speaker. But if she would very much like to come into the Home Office and have discussions about resettlement schemes and routes in constituencies, I'd be more than happy to look at that. And finally, Mr. Speaker, well, our ministers would be delighted to welcome her into the department for that conversation. She speaks about our plans not being in line with the Refugee Convention. Well, again, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I would like to correct her. Our new plan for immigration is in line with our international obligations, including the Refugee Convention. And she will also know that the Refugee Convention does allow for differentiated treatment, where, for example, she can shake her head, but perhaps she'd like to listen, refugees have not come directly from a country of persecution.
Right, let's go to John Howell. John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome particularly what my right honourable friend is proposing in dealing with people smuggling. But this is a bigger problem than simply the EU. The Council of Europe is dealing with this right across the Mediterranean and also from the Middle East. And will she join me in helping to share her approach with members of the Council of Europe as an example of what can be done?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend my honourable friend for the work that he's been doing with the Council of Europe, and in the past we've had many conversations as well about this very issue, about people, ways of working, but upstream issues around illegal migration. And he's absolutely right to highlight the issue around the Mediterranean. Too many people have died, tragically, under the most appalling circumstances. I'd be more than happy to work with him in terms of how we pursue this further.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper. Yvette.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Safe Passage report increasingly long waits for child and teen refugees in camps in Greece and elsewhere to be able to reunite with family in the UK who could care for them since the Dublin and Dub schemes were ended. Ministers promised us they would put in place safe legal routes in replacement, but they haven't done so and things are not working. So talking about safe legal routes isn't good enough if they don't materialise in practice. Does the Home Secretary not accept that, especially when it comes to vulnerable children and teenagers, lack of safe legal routes to rejoin family will drive more of them into the arms of dangerous people traffickers and make the situation much worse?
Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if the Honourable Lady had heard my statement, she would have heard some figures about those that are being trafficked right now. They're predominantly single men. She makes a very, very valid and important point, actually, and supports the case for safe and legal routes around children in particular. This isn't just about camps in Greece. And let's not forget, of course, we have been in a pandemic. And that is part of the reason, as she knows, and we've discussed this at Select Committee, and many honourable members in this House know this as well and have been reminded of this again and again and again. The government is absolutely committed, as the record shows, to resettling children and committed to family reunion rights. That is absolutely right. And we are doing that. We are committed to that. But through safe and legal routes, we need to create new routes and not just from the camps in Greece. The Honourable Lady will know as well, and I've been to many myself within regions where there are wars taking place and conflict. We need to create safe and legal routes, not just from the Mediterranean, because too many people are being smuggled to that Mediterranean route. We need to do much more in country and in some of those terrible zones, and I hope that she would actually support this work on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend is aware, many asylum seekers are being housed in hotels in central London and many hundreds in my constituency. Will my right honourable friend assure me that today's announcement will speed up the asylum process, that those who are successful will be resettled and those who are not will be quickly returned, and we can get the numbers in hotels down to zero?
And is absolutely right, and she's well versed in facts, and I do thank her for the way in which she's worked with ministers and myself and the Home Office on this issue of accommodation in her constituency. She and members of this House will know that the hotel policy is very much linked to the pandemic because we have not been able to utilise regular accommodation and dispersed accommodation. So along with contingency, we have been using hotels. But Mr. Speaker, there is another point to make here as well, which is about the processes that we have to look at cases. We are going to change the end-to-end system, and there is a reform package in place, including digitalisation of caseworking, faster assessments, all sorts of work on that basis, so I can give my honourable friend that assurance.
Alistair Carmine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Home Secretary tell us when the first refugees will be allowed to enter the UK under her new scheme, and how many will be settled each year?
Well, the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, will know that this paper today, the new immigration plan, is a consultation document. It's a command paper. So we are consulting, and we'll work with everybody that wants to work with us constructively on this. This will be subject to new legislation, and he will know the processes. But we as a government are absolutely committed. We are already in discussion right now with partner organisations that we can work with on safe and legal routes. And this is essential because when we look at the fact that there are 80 million people that are displaced in the world seeking refuge, we have a moral responsibility and an obligation to do the right thing and stand by those that are fleeing persecution, while at the same time not only working with other partners but other countries as well to make sure that they raise the bar too.
But Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a fantastic plan to fix our broken asylum system outlined today. This plan prioritises help to those most in need with safer legal routes, will stop deaths in the Channel and in lorries from people attempting illegal entry, deter those who abuse the system and jump the queue, particularly with a new age assessment process, and introduces new life sentences for the real criminals in all of this, the people smugglers. But my constituents will be rightly asking when. Can she outline the timetable for implementation of this plan and how they can get involved?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his constructive tone and comments. This plan is subject to consultation. This should be a people's consultation. The British public, with the publication today, should absolutely, I'd encourage all members to get their constituents on board and to join this consultation. And at the end of this consultation, we'll obviously draft a bill and we'll bring this to Parliament for second session.
Right, let us go to Bell Ribeiro Adi. Bell.
Mr. Speaker, the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol state that anyone seeking asylum should be able to claim in their intended destination or another safe country. but the government's new plan discriminates between people fleeing the same persecution based on their route or mode of transport. Does the Home Secretary realise that under this new plan, trafficked women, LGBTQ people, those fleeing political and religious persecution will be left with limited options? And rather than expanding safe and legal routes, this plan could actually leave more of those seeking family reunion at the mercy of people smugglers. This plan does not meet the needs of the most vulnerable. So can the Home Secretary explain how she reconciles this obvious misrepresentation of our obligations under international law?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I would advise the Honourable Lady to actually read the immigration plan, because in it she will see that the plan is in line with international obligations, including the Refugee Convention. And secondly, she's spoken already about categories of individuals that will be persecuted for who they are, their values, seeking to flee. Under our Safe and Legal Routes scheme, of course, they will be covered in that scheme. So she's completely wrong in her own misrepresentation.
Let's go to Alexander Stafford. Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents and I in Rother Valley welcome strong action in tackling illegal, dangerous migration. I know that my right honourable friend and her department are working tirelessly to bring the criminals facilitating the illegal channel crossings to justice and tackling this exploitative crime. Does my honourable friend agree that there is no justifiable reason for migrants to be making this crossing and putting themselves and our border force in danger when staying in France remains a perfectly safe and right option for them?
My friend is absolutely right, and I thank him for his question. People should claim asylum in the first safe country they arrive in. And that is the point that we are making again and again and again. Currently, they are in the hands of people traffickers, in the hands of smugglers, and they are being duped, quite frankly, into false promises and false hope. So there is no doubt whatsoever that obviously working with our counterparts, I've already mentioned the G6, Mr. Speaker, we will be pursuing this with greater vigour with counterparts, but the principle that he raises is fundamentally correct.
Let's go to Paul Blomfield. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This cynical announcement is built on the availability of safe and legal routes. This morning, the Home Secretary claimed, and I quote, "We have safe and legal routes and we have a programme called the Syrian Refugee Resettlement Scheme." But she will know that the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme actually finished at the end of February as its quota was filled. And there are no details of how the new UK resettlement scheme will work. So could the Home Secretary tell us how many people it will take, explain how it will operate, and outline, for example, the process available to a refugee from what is currently the world's worst conflict in Yemen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I won't take any lectures from the gentleman opposite about resettlement schemes at all when this government has successfully resettled 25,000 people, he shakes his head, but it's true, through that resettlement scheme. I've made it quite clear that we are in discussion with partner agencies already. This is work that is underway, and he can shake his head and be as dismissive as he chooses to be, but if he bothered to read the new immigration plan, he will see in there details of exactly how we will start to introduce, through legislation, new safe and legal routes.
Richard Fuller.
Mr. Speaker, Yarlswood Detention Centre in my constituency, set up under a Labour government in 2001, is a manifestation of the historical weaknesses of our immigration process, and in particular how they have failed women. Now, as my honourable friend knows, women asylum seekers are more likely to be individually targeted as victims of gender-based violence, forced marriage, sometimes to very powerful people, or rape as an instrument of war. So will my right honourable friend please assure me that her reforms will provide for a fairer and more effective assessment of such cases?
Friend, Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his question. He's absolutely right. And this is why we have to fix this system, because currently we are not able to safeguard and protect those who absolutely need that help and support. And it does, Mr. Speaker. The categories that it covers are women that have been treated abhorrently, quite frankly, in conflict zones, but also being trafficked and having the most awful crimes undertaken as well. Also used in modern-day slavery, which is also a feature of the new immigration plan and how we will protect victims more. So he's absolutely right, and we will definitely be looking at all of that.
Let's go to Joanna Cherry. Joanna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that the Home Secretary is planning on deporting even more asylum seekers than previously, will she address the lack of transparency on the content and scope of the UK government's existing returns and readmission agreements, as well as those under negotiation? And will she give an undertaking to remedy that lack of clarity and to publish these agreements for scrutiny? And will she also confirm that it's not the government's intention to send people back to countries where there's a real risk they will face torture or inhuman degrading treatment or punishment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always interested in the comments on the Honourable Lady, particularly in light of the way in which she caucuses and campaigns against flight removals, for example, as we've seen previously when we've attempted to remove foreign national offenders, some of the most murderous people with awful criminal records from our country. Of course, I can guarantee that we will not be removing people to areas, to parts of the world in which she has referred to. But I would also say, Mr. Speaker, that we do, and we are very clear in terms of the removal processes that we have, and also the categories of individuals that we remove, and the reasons as to why we remove them from the United Kingdom. And of course, that is predominantly those that have failed in their claims, but alongside that, many foreign national offenders who simply should not remain in our country.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start by saying that I and the people of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork warmly welcome this new plan to fix our broken system. Currently, the UK is one of the only countries in Europe not to use scientific age assessment to determine a person's age when they enter the country. I am sure many right honourable friends and members from across this House will have heard the stories of fully grown adults coming to the UK but claiming asylum as children. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that this statement will solve a very serious safeguarding risk for our young people?
Well, my friend raises such an important question, and Mr. Speaker, it's quite sobering, because I think over the years we've seen too many cases of adults posing as children, and that is quite unscrupulous behaviour. And I say that because of the safeguarding risks that my honourable friend raises. And he is right to say the UK is one of the only countries in Europe they use scientific age assessment methods to determine a person's age, and where age has been disputed and resolved between 2016 and 2020, 54% were found to be adults, which of course presents a very, very serious safeguarding risk to our young people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has form for lack of compassion towards those who have fled horrors that we can only imagine. From abandoning the Dubs child refugee scheme, to the broken system that is leaving asylum seekers in limbo for months, if not possibly years, and having to go to food banks because even the minimal support they're entitled to often isn't arriving. So how can my constituents have any faith in this government and whether it has one iota of compassion?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said earlier on, I'm simply not going to take lectures about the lack of compassion from the Honourable Lady or the party opposite at all. I've been abundantly clear in terms of the reasons as to why we have to tackle this system. And the right honourable lady, the honourable lady opposite, may be interested to know that there is not a single solution here. This is about end-to-end reform of the system. And I know it might be an uncomfortable truth for her, but this does actually mean tackling backlog of cases. It does mean tackling the people smugglers. It does mean stopping the criminal trade in human misery. And I'm only sorry that she can't see that, because the way in which we demonstrate compassion is by fixing the system and supporting those who are in desperate need to come here.
Let's go to Ben Bradley. Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the measures my right honourable friends laid out today, which will be warmly welcomed by my constituents in Mansfield, who just want to see a fairer system, both for people in genuine need and for UK taxpayers too. The most obvious example of that unfairness is the exploitation of people who are paying human traffickers just to be pushed out into the channel in a dinghy, particularly when they're coming from a safe country. So can she confirm that these measures are intended to ensure that these crossings are no longer worth the risk, and that should be increasing penalties available to law enforcement to be able to tackle people smugglers head on?
Well, my friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and as I've said in my statement, we need to break this trade. That is absolutely vital, because people are being used in such an appalling way and creating human misery. And I've outlined already the increases in sentences that we will be looking at in terms of sentences for facilitators and people smugglers, but also the new powers that we'll also be looking to give Border Force.
We now go to Rachel Maskell. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Immigration is the most defining issue of a government's character. Does it reach out to protect the most challenged people on earth or turn in on itself? When a government doesn't secure safe passage for people seeking asylum to come to the UK, criminal gangs will exploit them. So will the Home Secretary update the House on what steps she is taking to ensure that her policy is not just about building higher walls for people to climb over, but opening safer doors for people to walk through?
Mr. Speaker, I suggest that the Honourable Lady reads the new plan for immigration because it's spelt out in there.
Sir Ed Woodley.
Our present asylum system is a complete joke. Every young man living in misery in a failed state knows that if he managed to reach our shores, the chances of him being deported are virtually zero. And there is no point in introducing more and more penalties, more and more laws, unless we are prepared to deport people. Is the Home Secretary prepared to do what Prime Minister Abbott of Australia did? He ensured that because all arrivals were put in a secure location and left there until their claim was processed and they were deported or allowed to stay, there are now no unsafe arrivals in Australia. There are no deaths. There are no criminal gangs. The policy works. Is the Home Secretary prepared to be really tough in order to be kind?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've outlined already for the Right Honourable Gentleman, this proposal is a long-term plan and it needs to be addressed in the component parts that I have outlined. So the legal system, for example, which frustrates deportations, removals, very different system that we have here to Australia. But this is a fair but firm system because we have to be firm in terms of removing those that have exhausted all their rights and should not be here. That equally applies to foreign national offenders, which is part of the reason that I've outlined already in the new immigration plan.
Let's go to Margaret Farrier. Margaret.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary has spoken of efforts to strike agreements with countries outside Europe with the intention of returning legitimate asylum seekers simply because of the method of arrival to the UK. It's likely that these countries will be the same ones that we seek trade deals with in the post-Brexit environment. So will the Home Secretary tell us what discussions she has had with colleagues in the FCDO and Department for International Trade about how these third country agreements will impact on trade negotiations?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me assure the Honourable Lady that this isn't just a Home Office policy. This is a policy across government. So she would have heard me say already and speak about the Ministry of Justice and resetting the judicial framework. We will work with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the FCDO, in terms of removals. That is always something that we have done in the Home Office, and we will continue to work with them when it comes to our bilateral agreements for returns and removals.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Like the overwhelming majority of my North West Durham constituents, I want to see genuine refugees protected with safer legal routes so we don't see people dying in the Channel or in lorries. But they also want to see the vultures, first of all, the people smugglers who peddle in human misery, and secondly, the lawyers who spin out cases at the cost of hundreds of millions of pounds to the taxpayer every year, stopped. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this plan helps both genuine refugees and also takes on those who seek to abuse the current system?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and of course, as I've outlined, and when he looks at the new plan as well, there is a chapter in the policy paper on the judicial reset that is required. When it comes to the immigration tribunal, immigration bail, the appeals process, we will streamline that. And we will deal with the wasted costs as well, which the British taxpayers are paying for. We want to use that resource to make sure the money is going to those that are in need and not just those that are gaming the system.
Jim Shannon. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for her statement. I agree that those seeking asylum must do so in the appropriate way and that those who smuggle illegal immigrants must face the full extent of the justice system. However, I do have a concern, Secretary of State, over the role of children in these situations, as a child has no say over whether they are brought over legally or illegally. So will the Secretary of State outline special circumstances in place when it comes to children and minors who are totally innocent of deceit or of trying to play the system?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend makes such an important point about vulnerability and children in particular. It is, we need to find the right way in which we can safeguard them. And this is exactly the work that we are going to undertake with partner agencies to look at not just bringing them from camps in Europe, because Europe is a safe continent, but in particular from those parts of the world where we are seeing the most appalling levels of conflict, instability and persecution.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the package of measures my right honourable friend has brought forward today, particularly the maximum life sentences for people smugglers, so that there can be no wriggle room in the justice system when these abhorrent criminals face justice. Will she also look at introducing a very high minimum sentence so that the message goes out loud and clear that this is unacceptable and will face the full force of the law in this country?
Honourable friend, Mr. Deputy Speaker is absolutely correct on this, because we have to have the right sanctions and deterrents in place so that these people smugglers, their model is broken up. And of course this will be part of the consultation and I will absolutely work with him and others on this whole proposal.
Video link. Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's shocking to see some of the overcrowded and squalid accommodation, including in military barracks, used to house asylum seekers. Safe accommodation for vulnerable people is critical in any compassionate and effective asylum system, but particularly in the middle of a pandemic. So within her reforms, how does the Home Secretary plan to improve the quality of housing for people seeking asylum?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady will absolutely know in terms of the contingency accommodation that we've had to use because of the pandemic. We have looked at all sorts of options. But accommodation going forward, we use dispersed accommodation, and I do come back to the point about working with local authorities who will also be part of our discussions and consultations going forward. It's vital that we grow that footprint, and I'd be more than happy for her to work with us in coming up with alternative proposals on accommodation.
Tim Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome these proposals today, as I know my constituents and those of the South Coast constituencies in particular will do, and especially the distinction between those people who are wealthy enough to pay to be illegally smuggled into this country and those genuine refugees who go through the right processes. On safe and legal routes, will she give me the assurance that the successor to Dublin will be at least as generous as Dublin and the relatives that it covers, that it will be much more speedy in the processes to get people here who are deemed to have a place in the UK as soon as possible, and would she consider a Dubs 2 scheme, which was so successful in rescuing genuine endangered children from danger spots around the world, because it works so well?
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd be more than happy to meet with the right honourable gentleman to discuss this further. We need to get this right in terms of safeguarding children, and there is no one-size-fits-all here at all. And not only that, we need to learn the lessons of previous schemes as well and look at how we can strengthen some of the aspects around resettlement, for example, that may not have been strong enough. So I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with them about it.
Video link. Mick Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Instead of taking action to fix a broken and uncaring immigration system, the government instead seems intent on abandoning its long-standing humanitarian obligations, including the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. Does the Minister accept that this government's failure to improve the range of safe and legal routes to the UK will in fact push more people in the hands of people traffickers and increase the likelihood of tragedy in the English Channel?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm quite surprised by the honourable gentleman's statement and comment. Bear in mind he's not even had a look at the plan itself. It's quite clear to see. Because to do nothing is not an option, because people are dying. And these proposals are in line with the Refugee Convention and within international law and within ECHR. So I would recommend, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that rather than shake his head, the honourable gentleman reads the proposals and actually joins us in wanting to stop illegal people smuggling and to save lives.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's determination to prevent illegal crossings and tackle the scourge of people smuggling. Does my right honourable friend agree that there is no justifiable reason for migrants to cross the Channel and put lives at risk when France remains a perfectly safe option for them?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is absolutely the point, Mr Deputy Speaker. France and other countries across the EU member states are safe countries. People are not fleeing persecution from those countries, and they should and could claim asylum in those countries, and that is effectively what we need to work harder to achieve.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. In her statement, the Secretary of State said, "We celebrate those who have come to the UK lawfully and helped build Britain." So, can the Secretary of State assure us that while those people are awaiting the Home Office processing their claims, they are enabled to contribute to the economy of the United Kingdom by working, paying income tax and national insurance, rather than subsist on the meagre handouts which barely allow them to eat?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be well aware of the rules in place for asylum seekers currently in the UK. And also, if I may say so, Mr Deputy Speaker, a reminder that we are in a pandemic. So there are restrictions in terms of accommodation, movements and things of that nature. But the Honourable Lady, if she'd like to be refreshed on those rules, I'd be more than happy to drop her a line.
Biddy Link. Elliot Colburn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And one of the most common things I hear on the doorsteps in Carshalton and Wallington is frustration about an immigration and asylum system that simply doesn't work. So I know they will warmly welcome this firm but fair plan set out by my right honourable friend. And can she assure me that this will both tackle the criminal gangs exploiting vulnerable people and help reduce those dangerous attempts of small boat crossings across the Channel in favour of safe and legal routes?
My friend is absolutely right, and I know he's raised concerns about this issue in the past. And it's right, we have to absolutely break up the criminal trade, a criminal trade in human misery. And with that, of course, we will continue to do everything possible through these reforms. These are reforms that we are proposing today, which will go to public consultation, and then we want to bring in new legislation. Through the new legislation, absolutely achieve the outcomes that we are outlining today.
Biddy Link. Yeah. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. I've always believed that we have a duty to meet our international obligations in a fair, firm and humanitarian way, and the current system is failing on all three. But it's also important that we draw the distinction in this debate between legal migration, refugees, victims of people trafficking and illegal immigration. They are all very different things. Now, the Home Office has announced plans to introduce tougher age assessments. Can the Home Secretary confirm to the House that these new assessments will be sensitive to disabilities, trauma and medical needs, as well as being carried out with dignity and respect?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes some valid points around not just age assessments, but the categories of vulnerability that we are speaking about. We are launching a consultation today, which he will be aware of, and that is absolutely right that we give all due consideration to the different needs of individuals, as well as the circumstances and the situations that they are fleeing.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Never before have we had a Home Secretary who has shown such determination to finally get a grip of our failed and broken asylum system, and she deserves immense credit for this statement today. The residents of Blackpool are sick and tired of the delaying tactics used by left-wing human rights lawyers to prevent the lawful removal of failed asylum seekers. As a nation, we need to do far more to ensure that those who don't have a right to stay in the UK are deported. Absolutely. Can my right honourable friend reassure me that the measures outlined today will help to achieve that?
My honourable friend is absolutely right on this, and this is a very, very significant part of the frustrations of the system. And in fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are far too many predecessors in the Home Office that have all spoken about this as well. So the reforms that we are outlining today will mean a reset of the judicial framework around illegal, not just illegal migration, but immigration courts, bails, tribunals, and legal aid. And we absolutely need to grip this and bring around changes that will give justice to individuals that need the protection and the support that we want to give them.
I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for her statement today in responding to the 30 questions on the call list. We will now suspend for 3 minutes for the usual arrangements. Order! Order. Order. I now call Secretary Robert Jenrick to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I wish to make a statement about Liverpool City Council. Merseyside police have been carrying out an investigation involving a significant link to Liverpool City Council. Last year, this led to arrests on suspicion of fraud, bribery, corruption, misconduct in public office, and witness intimidation. On the 17th of December, I informed the House that additionally, persuasive evidence had been presented to me regarding the Council's planning, highways, regeneration, property management functions, and associated audit and governance arrangements. In light of that evidence, I commissioned Max Caller to conduct a best value inspection of the Council. I want to thank Max and his assistant inspectors, Vivian Geary and Mervyn Greer, for their thorough and evidence-based review. I have today placed a copy of their report in the library of the House. It paints a deeply concerning picture of mismanagement, the breakdown of scrutiny and accountability, a dysfunctional culture putting the spending of public funds at risk and undermining the city's economic development. The report identifies multiple apparent failures by Liverpool City Council in complying with its best value duty. This includes a failure of proper and due process across planning and regeneration, including worrying lack of record keeping. Indeed, documentation had sometimes been created retrospectively, discarded in skips, or even destroyed. A lack of scrutiny and oversight across highways, including dysfunctional management practices, no coherent business plan, and the awarding of dubious contracts. A failure of proper process relating to property management, including compliance with the Council's own standing orders, leading to a continued failure to correctly value land and assets, meaning taxpayers frequently lost out. When selling land, the report states that Liverpool City Council's best interests were not on the agenda. Poor governance arrangements for council-operated companies, an overall environment of intimidation described as one in which the only way to survive was to do what was requested without asking too many questions or applying normal professional standards. The review finds that there was a fundamental failure by members to understand and appreciate the basic standards governing those in public service, and with no regular ethics or standards committee and no means of monitoring complaints effectively, there was no established way to hold those falling below those acceptable standards to account. As a whole, the report is unequivocal that Liverpool City Council has failed in numerous respects to comply with its best value duty. It concludes that the Council consistently failed to meet its statutory and managerial responsibilities, and that the pervasive culture appeared to be rule avoidance. It further concludes that changes need to be radical, delivered at pace, and there was no confidence that the Council itself would be able to implement these to any sensible timescale. There may also be further issues of which we are not yet aware, and the report is careful not to speak to matters that might compromise the ongoing police investigation. I want to underline the report is not a verdict on all the staff working at Liverpool City Council. In fact, the report commends the hard work and dedication of many. The report is also clear that the current Chief Executive, Tony Reeves, and statutory officers have taken positive remedial steps, and I wish to thank Tony for his dedication and service. Neither does it comment on the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, on Mayor Steve Rotherham, or other councils in Merseyside. Despite the good work undertaken by Mr. Reeves, there is a clear picture that there has been a serious breakdown of governance at the council. If unchecked, It will allow improper conduct to persist, further undermining public confidence, putting public services at risk, and damaging the city's ability to attract investment from reputable developers and investors for regeneration, and to take full advantage of new economic opportunities, such as the recent successful application for Freeport status. Expressed in formal terms, I'm satisfied that the Council is failing to comply with its best value duty. Therefore, I need to consider exercising my powers of intervention to secure compliance with the duty. To that end, in line with the procedures laid down in the Local Government Act 1999, I'm writing today to the Council asking them to make representations, both on the Inspector's report and on a proposed intervention package. This package is centred on putting in place commissioners who I will appoint to exercise certain and limited functions of the Council as required for a minimum of 3 years. I'm also proposing that the Council will, under the oversight of the commissioners, prepare and implement an improvement plan. This would require the following provisions. Within 6 months, to approve a suitable officer structure, providing sufficient resources to deliver the Council's functions in an effective way, including the improvement plan and its monitoring and reporting. Within 12 months, to review and change the Council's constitution. Within 24 months, to conduct a review of the roles and case for continuing with each subsidiary company of Liverpool City Council. To create a detailed structure and strategy for the highways function. To establish a plan to deliver an effective file management system. To implement a programme of cultural change so both members and officers understand their roles and the Council's activities are regulated, governed, and breaches are rectified swiftly. To require the consent of commissioners before either member or officer level agree heads of terms for any property transaction, and subsequent consent before any legally binding commitment is entered into. I also propose to direct that prior agreement of commissioners must be attained to any dismissal or suspension of statutory officers or the Assistant Director of Governance, Audit and Assurance or equivalent. Furthermore, any appointments to positions designated as a statutory officer or the head of internal audit must be conducted under the direction of and to the satisfaction of the commissioners. I hope and expect Liverpool City Council to take the lead in this path to improvement. However, given the gravity of the inspection findings, I must consider what would happen if the Council fails to deliver the necessary changes at the necessary speed. I'm consequently proposing to direct the transfer of all executive functions associated with regeneration, highways and property management at the authority to the commissioners. These are for use should the Council not satisfy the commissioners in their improvement processes. As I say, I hope it won't be necessary for the commissioners to use these powers, but they must, in my view, be empowered to do so to deliver the reforms that are required. The commissioners will report to me at 6 monthly intervals on progress being made. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the report also considers the impact of the Council's cycle of elections, where every year is an election year, concluding this system reduces scrutiny and inhibits long-term focus. It recommends that the Council should move to all-out elections and for the Council's size to be reconsidered. Accordingly, I'm also proposing to use my powers under the Local Government Act 2000 to provide for Liverpool City Council to hold whole council elections for the first time from 2023. This will be in addition to proposals for a reduced number of councillors elected on single-member wards, which the report also recommends. I believe it would be preferable to move to a single-member ward system at the earliest available opportunity. I'm now seeking representations from the Council on the report and the decisions I'm proposing to take by the 24th of May. The forthcoming elections will proceed as planned, and Liverpool City Mayor will be elected on the 6th of May, and the Cabinet will then have time to provide their views. If I decide to intervene along the lines I've set out today, I will then make the necessary statutory directions under the 1999 Act and appoint the commissioners, and I'll update the House on any conclusions in due course. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a rare occasion when central intervention is required. In addition to the measures I propose today, the government will work closely with the political, the business and the cultural leadership of the city and with the wider region, including with Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of the Liverpool City region. We will do all we can to support the city as it recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic and to give confidence to those who want to invest in the city, to contract with the council and to do business in Liverpool. As the son and grandson of Liverpudlians, I know Liverpool and I appreciate the sense of humour, the loyalty and the warmth of its residents. I also understand the city's independent spirit, and so I'm clear that we are embarking on a partnership to mend a politics that for too long has been rooted in a pervasive and rotten culture. I'm hopeful that this is the start of a new chapter for Liverpool City Council, because in all of this, it is the residents of Liverpool who are being let down, whose regeneration is being undermined, whose taxpayers' money is being wasted, and whose city is being besmirched rather than cited with municipal pride. Mr. Deputy Speaker, despite the rare cases, like Liverpool City Council, as a whole, councils in this country have a good record of transparency, of probity, of scrutiny and accountability. It is a reputation worth protecting. I will take whatever steps are necessary to uphold the good name of local government and to weed out practices that do it down. I commend this statement to the House.
Steve Reid. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement and the report, and indeed for his openness with me throughout the process. This report raises grave and serious concerns about decision-making in key functions of Liverpool City Council. All councils are under an obligation to meet their best value duty and to ensure value for money at all times. In these respects, Liverpool City Council has been found severely wanting. Labour, both here and our leadership at the City Council, accept this report in full. The Council will respond to the Secretary of State's letter in detail, but we support his intention to appoint commissioners not at this stage to run the Council, as he says, but to advise and support elected representatives in strengthening the Council's systems. This is a measured and an appropriate approach. I want to reassure people in Liverpool that this does not mean government ministers are coming in to run their city directly. This is not, as some would put it, a Tory takeover. It's about the government appointing independent people of the highest professional standing to help the council improve as quickly as possible and intervening directly only if the council's elected leaders fail to implement their own improvement plan. Investigations are currently underway into matters raised in this report, and I will not preempt them. I do, though, want to reiterate my party's absolute commitment to protecting the public interest at all times and to upstanding the highest possible standards in public life. Given the concerns raised in this report, the General Secretary of the Labour Party intends to appoint a senior figure to lead a review and reassure the people of Liverpool that the Labour Party takes these concerns seriously and will take action against anyone in our ranks who is involved in wrongdoing of any kind. Our councillors in Liverpool have already met with senior Labour councillors from other parts of the country who will support them in strengthening the City Council's defences against any risk of fraud. The overwhelming majority of councillors and frontline staff will be shocked by what they read in this report. And as the report and the Secretary of State have made clear, the severe institutional weaknesses identified here do not obscure the outstanding work they have all done together over many years. The Prime Minister was right to praise the Council's impressive work in getting the city through the pandemic, and I want to add my thanks to everyone who continues to play a part in that. In particular, the report praises the Council's Chief Executive, Mr Tony Reeves, and I offer my support to him and to the Acting Mayor, Councillor Wendy Simon, for the work they have already started to put things right. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Mr Max Calla and his team for putting this very important report together. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a moment for change, and I know that everyone who cares about the great city of Liverpool and its wonderful people will accept this report and use it to strengthen the Council for the future.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for the remarks that he's just made, for the way in which we have worked together over the recent months. He has been most helpful and constructive, and I hope that can continue. Can I thank him on behalf of the government for the remarks he's just made with respect to the Labour Party, with respect to the Labour group on Liverpool City Council. That's extremely welcomed. The step we've made today is unusual, and it's better to do this in a cross-party way. We all share the same interests, which are the delivery of public services, ensuring that the people of Liverpool get the value for money and the council that they deserve, and ensuring that it can attract the inward investment, the regeneration and the good quality development that the city certainly needs and we want to see delivered as we come out of the pandemic. He was right, and I thank him again for highlighting the Chief Executive, Tony Reeves, who has done an outstanding job. And in my remarks earlier, I praised his conduct and that of the other statutory officers at the Council. He's also right to say that this report focuses on particular functions of Liverpool City Council and does not comment on the wider delivery of public services in the city by the Council. There is no reason to question the delivery of adult services, children's services, other important functions that people in the city rely on. And he's also right to praise the work of many people in Liverpool, including within the City Council, in their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I would underline my remarks once again that this is a report about Liverpool City Council. It is not about the neighbouring councils across Merseyside, and neither is it any reflection on the Mayor of the Liverpool City region, Steve Rotherham. I extend my thanks to him once again for his cooperation and support. It's right that we take this action, and I hope that we can continue to work together on it. None of us do this lightly. Localism is our objective, but localism does require local accountability, transparency and robust scrutiny, and that, I hope, is what we can now achieve.
And I'd just like to say before I call any of the other members, whilst I don't believe, whilst there are a number of individuals under investigation, I understand that there has been no charges, so there's no sub judice involved, but I would caution members that it is best that they do not compromise any of the ongoing investigations in anything that they may or may not say. Video link. Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I also thank the Secretary of State for his statement today and welcome the steps he's outlined in relation to Liverpool City Council. And I welcome the steps he's taking to preserve the good name of local government too. I regularly hear from constituents with concerns in relation to the level of commercial activity that councils are now undertaking. Does he agree with me that some of the transaction councils are involved in are incredibly complicated, well beyond what councils would have traditionally been involved in, and that external audit and public scrutiny needs to be reviewed and greatly improved to protect taxpayers' interests?
Well, my honourable friend, I think, raises an important point. We ask a lot of local councils, and we'll ask it once again as we come out of the pandemic. We want them to be regenerating town and city centres. We want them to be investing in new housing, but we want them to do so carefully and not to invest in risky investment, not to transfer toxic assets from the private sector to the public sector. We've taken action as a government through reforming the Public Works Loan Board, through providing further guidance to local councils, and through the work of the report we commissioned from Sir Tony Redmond to ensure that the sector improves the way it handles this situation. Of course, the allegations made against Liverpool City Council are of a different magnitude to the ones that we've seen in other parts of the country, so I don't want to draw direct comparisons, but there is more work to be done at some other local authorities as well.
Midi-Link. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is clearly a very serious situation. It's obviously a very major step to take powers away from elected representatives, so I really appreciate and accept the proportionate and correct response from the Secretary of State and from the Shadow Secretary of State as well. I also appreciate the Secretary of State's comments about the many hard-working staff in Liverpool, including the Chief Executive, who have got nothing to do to be blamed for in terms of this crisis, and also his comments about the general excellent performance of local government as a whole. Could I say that the Secretary of State has set out very clearly his list of requirements from the City Council and when he expects those to be achieved by. So could I ask him, how will monitoring against these requirements be undertaken? How will Parliament be updated about them? And of course, it goes without saying, if there's anything the Select Committee can do to assist in that process, we stand ready to do so.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, the Chair of the Select Committee, and I'd be happy to work with him should he require any further information or wish to discuss this matter further. If we go ahead with the proposal that I've made today, then the commissioners, once appointed, would report to me on a 6-monthly basis, and I would be happy to keep the House informed of the information they provide to me. We will ensure that there is an improvement plan in place for the city, which is produced by the newly elected mayor, by their cabinet, and supported by Liverpool City Council, but advised and guided by the commissioners that are put in place. And then it will be absolutely essential that that plan is delivered, and it will be for all of us in this House, and in particular for those members of Parliament representing parts of Liverpool, to hold the Council to account for the successful delivery of that plan. Our objective is to restore public confidence in the Council as quickly as possible so that residents can have confidence that they have a well-functioning Council in all respects, and so that all those people, legitimate businesses and developers and those wishing to contract with the Council, have complete confidence that Liverpool is a city open for business and they can work to drive up the city's prosperity as we come out of the pandemic.
Philip Holloway.
Praise both Max Caller, who's a superb inspector, and also the Secretary of State's decision to send in commissioners. Though the problems in Liverpool City Council are far worse, in 2018 in Northamptonshire, Max Caller was sent in to do a best value inspection, and subsequently the government sent in commissioners. Since that point, under the leadership of Commissioner Tony McArdle and the new political leadership of Councillor Matt Golby, the situation in Northamptonshire County Council has been transformed and their performance has been raised beyond all expectations. So the point I wish to make to the Secretary of State is, isn't it the case that if councillors and officers in Liverpool City Council respond positively to the challenge set to them by the government, actually public services in Liverpool City can be raised once again to the standards they should be at?
I think my honourable friend raises a very important point. My predecessors have used their powers of intervention very sparingly. They've done so on a small number of occasions in Doncaster, in Rotherham, in Tower Hamlets, in Hackney and in Northamptonshire. Each occasion was very different, but in most of those cases the intervention has proved successful and it has turned councils around. The commissioners will behave sensitively, will support the elected leadership of Liverpool City Council and will ensure that confidence is restored, public services are delivered properly and taxpayer money is spent wisely. This does require now leadership from the politicians in Liverpool, those who will be elected in the local council elections to come. But I look forward to working with them, and if we do appoint commissioners, expect the commissioners to work with them constructively and productively at all times.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I refer members to my register of interests. I will read the report in full today when I receive it. It's been a great honour to work alongside many Liverpool councillors and council staff who worked so tirelessly to protect the people of Liverpool before and during the pandemic, and indeed were recognised for this work within this chamber. So can the Secretary of State give my great city
and its people assurances that this crucial work, on which so many of our constituents rely on, will continue, and that these vital services will be both resourced and protected.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for those remarks, and I share his thanks and praise for many of the staff of Liverpool City Council, for the wider health and social care sector across the region, for the good work that they've done over the course of the year, in which myself, the Health Secretary, and indeed the Prime Minister has praised them for on many occasions. We want to ensure they continue to have the resources, and we want all of government to see this as a moment in which, far from stepping away, rather we should redouble our efforts to support the city through a potentially difficult period. And I will be convening my cabinet and ministerial colleagues in the coming days to reiterate that message to them and ask them to do even more to support Liverpool. There have been good news in recent weeks, including from my right honourable friend the Chancellor at Liverpool was successful in his application for Freeport status, and that's just one example of good news and investment that I hope will take the city forward in the years to come.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement. It's clear that too many senior people at Liverpool City Council have failed that great city during this pandemic. But it's not just there. Nottinghamshire City Council has given its councillors a bumper pay rise, even after bankrupting the council. And at Durham County Council, Labour run for 102 years. They're spending £50 million plus on a new county hall and a floodplain. And at the height of the pandemic last year, they approved a new 3,500 square foot roof terrace for themselves. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this shows it's not only in Liverpool where the Labour Party has got its priorities wrong, and where Labour councillors are putting themselves above the people they serve?
Well, all councils have a fundamental duty to their residents to provide good value for money. And at the heart of our decision to intervene in Liverpool to commission Max Caller and his report was persuasive evidence that they were falling below that standard, and that is what Max Caller has indeed concluded today. All councils need to ensure they're providing good quality public services and that they are taking care with the money that they're entrusted to. I hope that we can correct the situation in Liverpool that has now gone on for too long, and that other councils across the country in different situations also take note and take particular care when spending the public's money.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I would also like to pay tribute to the incredible staff at Liverpool City Council during this very difficult time. And I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House today and hope he will agree to meet with the 5 members for Liverpool at the earliest opportunity. I, for one, do not doubt the seriousness of the issues that have been raised today, and I look forward to receiving a copy of the Caller report. That public resources have been put at risk is deeply worrying, because resources are needed for investment in the vital services on which my constituents depend. And that is even more so at a time when funding has been cut year on year. So will the Secretary of State take this chance to reassure my wonderful city and anyone concerned that commissioners will be totally independent and their focus will be working on the interests of the people of Liverpool?
I certainly can. The commissioners will be appointed by me and will work to me, but their task is to support the city and its elected leadership to ensure that a good and credible improvement plan is brought forward as quickly as possible, and then that is implemented, and that the mistakes and errors and omissions of the past are put right, so that confidence can be restored to the city, so that the Honourable Lady's constituents can know in confidence they've got a well-functioning City Council, and that we can move forward as swiftly as possible. I share her support for the city. It's a great city. It deserves a good, functioning City Council, and that's exactly what we want to achieve.
Video link. John Howell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Does this sad but not but very welcome action not send a firm indication to all councils that we will step in where irregularities over best value, particularly in planning, occur? And would he also comment on his remarks about the need for whole council elections? And does that mark a change across the whole of the country in trying to rid ourselves of those councils that go for elections every year?
Well, the report that we've laid today makes 2 specific recommendations with regard to Liverpool City Council, as I outlined earlier. Firstly, recommending that we move as swiftly as possible to hold council elections, and secondly, recommending single-member wards. This recommendation will, subject to the views of those who will come forward over the coming weeks, be implemented. But I do agree that it has wider application, and that a thread that we have seen through a number of failed councils has been a lack of scrutiny and accountability for members where they've been in multi-member wards, and where having elections time and again in thirds has led to a lack of scrutiny, a lack of focus on the council. So I would like to see more councils take note of these recommendations and implement them on their own regard.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm a very proud Scouser, but listening to the Secretary of State read the contents of the very damning report makes me angry, as will the whole city when the report is made public. But we are a resilient city and we will fight back from this. The city deserves a well-run council with stronger, more transparent governance procedures that are more able to manage public finances. Important steps have been made to do the rights from the wrongs at the council by the current Chief Exec Tony Reeves and the acting mayor. So can the Secretary of State confirm the timetable for the proposed interventions by commissioners, and whether this will be reviewed and monitored and reduced if progress is made at speed? And can you tell us what the role of the Chief Executive and the elected councillors who have supported our community so well during this crisis will play in rebuilding the trust to the public? Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Well, like her fellow Liverpool colleagues, can I thank her for the way in which she's spoken this afternoon. The timetable for the period ahead is that the report is now available for members of the public, for colleagues in Parliament, and for the Council to review and consider at length. They have until the 24th of May to revert to me with comments and representations. We've chosen a longer than normal period, reflecting the fact that the local elections will now take place, enabling the new council and the newly elected mayor the time after the local elections have concluded to meet, to consider and to make those representations to me. Once those representations have been made, I will consider them carefully and decide whether to proceed with the proposal that I've outlined to the House today, or whether to change it in any way. And then I'll revert to the House after that with my final decision. If that is to appoint commissioners, then we will set out the process and the names of the individuals that I've chosen.
Billy Link. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The allegations my right honourable friend describes will be familiar to many residents of Sandwell Borough as well. As a former local councillor, I know how important it is that elected members are able to both guide and to scrutinise officers. Does he think that the reason why Liverpool City councillors have been unable to do this in this instance is due to lack of powers, lack of capacity, or lack of capability?
Well, I would recommend that the Honourable Gentleman reads the report by Max Caller, which sets out his observations, having spent the last 3 months working in and around the council, having dozens, if not hundreds, of conversations and interviews with councillors and with officers. He does conclude that the council needs to raise its game substantially. That is in respect of some officers and also some elected members. That there needs to be much greater scrutiny and accountability, that there needs to be much greater care in the way that those elected members manage public money, how they manage directly owned and operated companies that the council has chosen to use, and that it has a greater sense of vision for the future and a business plan for its activities. So there is a great deal of work now ahead for those individuals who are elected after the May elections, and I hope that they will show the leadership that is required to turn the city around. But it will be a big task, but we're here to support them.
Video link. We've got Dan Carden there. We'll just hold on that and go straight to Damien Moore. Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement today. As he knows, Mr Speaker, my constituency of Southport, although I'm not in the Liverpool City area, is part of the Liverpool City region. Given our proximity, this situation is causing alarm to my constituents. But will my right honourable friend take further action to allay any fears that my constituents have about our own local authority, but also meet with me to discuss better scrutiny arrangements for local authorities like mine to give further reassurance to constituents?
Well, I'd be happy to meet with my honourable friend, and I should have said in answer to the honourable lady opposite that, of course, I'd be happy to meet with Liverpool City members as well. I believe they met with the local government minister earlier today, but I'd be happy to have a further conversation with them. I should say again that this report is specific to Liverpool City Council. It is not a comment on the neighbouring councils that make up the Liverpool City region, but I understand he may have concerns about his own council, and I'd be happy to discuss those.
Video link. And there you are, Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State and my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary, for their statements. We all appreciate the seriousness of the situation. Clearly, we do need to see real change and robust new safeguards that guarantee transparency and accountability. The people of Liverpool must be part of that process, and this week I've been contacted by local people concerned that sending commissioners into Liverpool amounts to a takeover by Whitehall. So would the Secretary of State take this opportunity to outline to my constituents how their voice and their democratic rights will be respected?
Well, the elections will go ahead in May, and they will see a new directly elected mayor elected. They will also see new councillors elected to the council and the cabinet appointed by the new mayor. It's important that then those individuals firstly make representations to me about the report and what they want to see happen, and depending on the ultimate course of action that I take, having listened carefully to those views, if we do choose to appoint commissioners as I've proposed today, those commissioners will be going to Liverpool to stand behind the elected mayor, the cabinet and the elected members of the city council, not to tell them what to do, but to guide and support them. And I very much hope that the elected members, elected by his constituents, will rise to the occasion, drive the change and reform that's needed on the city council, and the commissioners will never need to exercise their powers. We have given them the authority to act, should they need to, given the seriousness of some of the allegations, but it is not our hope or expectation that those powers will be exercised.
Video link, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As the Shadow Secretary of State said, my party supports the 7 Nolan principles on standards in public life, be it in town halls or Whitehall, underpinning the Councillors' Code of Conduct and the Ministerial Code. Now, the Standards Board, which promoted high ethical standards in local government and oversaw the nationally imposed Code of Conduct, was abandoned in 2012 by the Secretary of State's government. Considering today's statement, does the Secretary of State think that that was a mistake?
Well, there has been a significant piece of work undertaken by the Committee on Standards in Public Life with respect to the way that ethics and standards are applied within local government at all levels, from parish councils, where we do unfortunately very rarely, but on occasion, see issues of misconduct, bullying and harassment, right the way up to larger councils of the scale of Liverpool City Council. And I'm carefully considering their views on how we should proceed, and we'll be responding to that in due course. And that will set out the government's view and the actions that we're minded to take to ensure that there are always correct processes and always routes for redress, regardless of who is at stake. And that, I think, will provide many of the answers to the Honourable Lady's questions.
Mr Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The report outlined by my right honourable friend mentioned a number of very serious failings by the Liverpool City Council over many years. And does he agree that in addition to the steps being taken to improve the council's financial position, an entirely new culture needs to be embedded at the council, and one that puts the residents of Liverpool first?
Yes, the report is clear that a major cultural change is required at the council. Mr Calla concludes that that will require radical change, both by some members and by some officers. I hope that those steps will now be taken. They are absolutely essential if we're going to restore confidence in the council. That's our objective. I'm sure it's the objective of most reasonable people in the City of Liverpool, and we'll be working together to achieve it.
Video link. Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I refer to my register of interests. And having served as a local councillor myself, I've seen the positive difference that local government can make in our communities, despite tough financial circumstances. I know there will be thousands of councillors and council officers who are going above and beyond during the pandemic, including in Liverpool, who will be shocked and saddened by the report's findings and today's announcements. So, does the Secretary of State agree with me that today's announcement is the exception not the norm for local government? So we can reassure those from across all our political parties who are standing for election in May and who want to do the right thing by serving their local communities to the best of their abilities.
The Honourable Lady makes an extremely important point, and one that I made in my opening remarks. This is a rare intervention. Interventions of this nature have only been made on a handful of occasions in the last 20 years. We do so carefully and with a heavy heart, but because it's necessary to ensure that this council can reform, can change its ways, and we can ensure that the people of Liverpool get the good quality government that they deserve. This is not a reflection on local government more generally across this country. In fact, we are taking this action to defend the good name of local government across this country. And I want to pay tribute to officers and councillors the length and breadth of England for the good work they do day in, day out.
Video link. Bob Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State and the Shadow Secretary of State for the comments they've made in a bipartisan manner. Clearly, one of the issues of concern to Liverpool residents will be what extra costs may be borne as a result of this decision. Clearly, the commissioners may be in place for some considerable period of time. So can my right honourable friend reassure us that the Liverpool council taxpayers will not be picking up the costs of these commissioners if they're duly appointed, and that if the commissioners recommend to the Secretary of State further proposals on expenditure, he will consider those appropriately?
Well, the costs of the report that has been undertaken by Max Calla and of the commissioners will be borne by Liverpool City Council. But I expect that the work to come will save the taxpayers of Liverpool a great deal of money, because underlying the report by Mr Calla is the sense that many millions of pounds have been wasted as a result of mismanagement by the City Council, and I very much hope we'll put that right.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Newspaper headlines in this kind of situation can often make it appear that a whole council, indeed a whole city, are being traduced, so I welcome the Secretary of State's recognition that there are a number of good people in the council doing a good job. And I also welcome his emphasis on partnership moving forward, because as the Honourable Member for Liverpool Walton said, no one likes to feel that things are being done to them, and it will be much better all round if this is done in a collegiate manner. But the question I want to ask is about transport. Many of my constituents use Mersey travel facilities to get to work and visit family. The Secretary of State didn't expressly refer to that in his statement. Does he know whether that was looked at as part of this investigation?
I don't believe that was looked at as part of this investigation. The highways function of Liverpool City Council was investigated by Mr Calla, and he has made some remarks with regard to some of its processes and contracts that have been entered into with regard to it. But I don't believe he has looked at the broader transport network across the Liverpool City region or made any comment one way or another on that.
Video link. I was not expecting...
Thank you.
No, sorry. It is. It's been switched. Sorry, I was expecting Tim Farron. You clearly are not Tim Farron, but you... but it's been switched again. Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Not so long ago, Liverpool was the